You know what? I was waiting for that.
Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I was waiting for the crowds to filter in, but I guess we can start anyway. Item 2 now comes before us. This is our regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimate Taxation for December 2010. Non-routine items will be addressed first. With that, our first one, RF4 from the Retirement Board, our Art Norton, who heads the Investment Committee, will address the BET.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Investment Committee, I want to move the following resolution requested by the Greenwich Retirement Board, that we amend the contract that we have between Loomis and Sales and the town of Greenwich for the purpose of adding 2 funds, the Loomis Sales Fixed Income Fund, the Loomis Sales Institutional High Income Fund. And the vote of the Investment Committee was 3-0 at our November 30th, 2010 meeting.
It's moved by Mr. Norton, second by Mr. Pellegrino. Discussion.
Yes. The 2 funds that are being added here to replace other funds will have an investment of $20 million into the Loomis Sales Fixed Income Fund and an investment of $24 million, I believe it is, into the $21,803,000 into the Loomis Sales Global Income Fund, Bond Fund.
Discussion. Ms. Barton.
The Law Committee met this afternoon with the Law Department and voted 2-0 to approve the proposed amendment as being routine and in good legal order.
Thank you for that. Further discussion. Right, we're still on RF4. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions. 11-0-0. I believe that Mr. Raymer had indicated earlier that he would not be present this evening.
He did.
Great. SE 9 now comes before us. That's through our Law Committee. So with that, Nancy Barton, its chair.
The proposed appropriation is $4,000 for the settlement of a routine personal injury case, and I move that it be approved.
Moved by Ms. Barton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Campbell. Discussion? Hold on. Mr. Mason, discussion if there's
Just a question for clarification.
clarification question. Go ahead.
Is this insured? I would almost look down at Mr. Kelly. I think there's normally an insurance policy on these activities, separate. Is this a deductible or is this the settlement?
My understanding is this comes out of the risk fund. Our deductible is well higher than this amount.
Okay.
So what is the deductible?
Our deductible for personal injury cases and other cases is $1 million.
No, I think there's a separate insurance policy for intramural sports.
The deductible is different.
Sports? Didn't hear anything about it. Don't know.
Certain activities there is, but I think it would be all-encompassing.
Can't hear you.
That's what I try and do. I talk in a sotto voce, so it doesn't, nothing comes out. Certain events there are, unique events, Mike, there are, such as big events, we do take out a separate policy, but I think this is under the all-encompassing town policy.
further limited discussion unless we want to go into executive session? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. PD3 now comes before us. With that, Michael Mason, Chair of the Budget Committee.
PD3 is an interim appropriation, let's see, $211,036, automotive equipment. I so move that on behalf of the Budget Committee.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. Mr. Mason.
If I may, this is the item that we know this month went out of cycle, went through the RTM cycle first. It's before us. Ford Motor Company is discontinuing the police interceptor that we have, 19 of them for the town's police operation, and we have some additional ones for detective and other services. The town wants to be ahead of the curve. The known replacement by General Motors, Chrysler, or Ford Motor Company is still up in the air. The town has sampled a couple of the other vehicles, the Impala and the Chrysler product. They're working on sampling one of the new Ford products, but there's a replacement, what do we call, commercial vehicle being developed, they say now, by all of these companies, but that won't be available for a while. These cars would have been routinely replaced in our upcoming budget cycle, which they would have been ordered, these cars would have been ordered July 1st of this year. However, with the backlog, the police chief and the finance office in the police department thought it would be a wiser move to order them now. We probably won't get them any sooner than if we ordered them in July, and it'll be 9 new Crown Vics they'll put in inventory and replace the cars as they need to be replaced as per their mileage.
This was originally routine out of the Budget Committee because of the extensive conversation at the RTM level earlier in the month and then at the Budget Committee level. But because it is a unique situation where we're approving it after the RTM, I had moved it up to the non-routine in case anybody did have any questions about it. But I do know that through the Budget Committee there was extensive conversation, and like I said, we were fortunate enough to hear the conversation that happened at the RTM level as well. Further discussion. All those in favor of PD3 for an additional appropriation of $211.36 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Those are all of the non-routine applications. Consideration of our one routine application, I call on Mr. Pellegrino, our clerk.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we have a motion, GM1. This is from GEMS. It's a request for a release of conditions. Specifically, it's for the second half payment of $1,731,247. This is per contract to meet their requirements.
And just so everyone in the audience who is wondering why this appropriation is coming forward, this is actually a budgeted amount. It is not an additional appropriation. Every year we condition approximately a half of the GEMS budget and then take up the matter with them to review their financials to make sure they're on track. And in fact, they had a discussion with the Budget Committee last week, and this is simply the approval of what is essentially the second half of their budget. Okay. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Did I get a second on that?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah, I just did.
Okay, that was originally moved by Mr. Pellegrino, second by Mr. Mason. Thank you. Item 4 now comes before us, the assessor's report. With tonight our assessor, Ted Gortney, and our assistant town assessor, Bob Shipman. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, board members. You have my report in front of you. I have just 2 additional comments to make. First, as of tonight, the number of informal hearings that have been scheduled are 528, and they've heard 75% of those, and the rest have been scheduled for January. And the second item is, if you notice on item 8, we have been successful in settling 3 court cases, having 2 withdrawals. I'm very pleased to report that the Law Department will be making a recommendation to the Selectmen on a settlement for the Greenwich American, which is our largest outstanding case. Be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Pellegrino.
Ted, just for clarification, could you just spend a moment for the public that if they have either had an informal hearing or plan to have an informal hearing, what exactly is the process after that informal hearing?
We review the recommendations, and then those recommendations are put into our data processing system by my staff. They will all be informed by a letter that will be sent in early February that will give people an opportunity to still appeal before the Board of Assessment Appeals. Those have to be filed by the 21st of March.
So essentially, anyone having an informal hearing will expect a response back from your department?
Yes. Whether there's a reduction made or a sustained, everyone who attends an informal hearing will get a letter.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion. Ms. Tarkington.
Yeah, I think one thing that we did talk about, there are even cases where revaluations could be increased under certain circumstances. So I just didn't want that left out of your list of what
Yes.
could happen.
Yes, and we did, whenever there's been an increase, we have sent a letter to the taxpayer so that they're aware of the increase, and they still have an opportunity to go both to the informal hearing and to the Board of Assessment Appeals.
Further discussion. Is there an acceptance of the assessor's report? Moved by Ms. Tarkington, second by Mr. Finger. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move that we move new business item number 12, in particular, the bullet point, accessibility of information pertaining to land use influence factors, and that we take that up at this point in time rather than waiting until new business begins.
Oh. It's been moved by Ms. Tarkington, second by Mr. Finger, to move the second bullet point under new business to now from item 12 on our agenda so that the assessor can comment if there are any comments from the assessor. I think that's an excellent motion. I would say, though, that the person who was most interested in this came from an interested citizen. I would ask if the assessor wouldn't mind to take the matter up at around 7 o'clock or whenever convenient at that time, just to give that individual the opportunity to show up if he chooses to do so. If the assessor wouldn't mind simply waiting about 15 minutes or so, and we'll take that matter up at 7 o'clock. Okay? So,
Do I
let
need
me
to
change. If you change the motion, let's just vote on it now.
To say that we'll bring it up at 7 o'clock this evening?
7 o'clock, that's for lunch.
I'm sorry?
Well, no, I think we could just do it now. We'll just
Would
get
you
it.
like to
All right.
second that?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 11-0-0. Okay, so at or about 7 o'clock, whenever it's convenient, we'll take that up. Okay. Item 5 now comes before us, the Comptroller's report. Tonight, our Comptroller, Peter Mynarski. Good evening.
Good evening. On the Comptroller's report, I'll start out with page 1, the lease accounting project. Just to clarify what exactly I'm doing on that one, I'm working with the RTM Finance Committee. There was a sense of the meeting resolution passed, and basically what they're doing is they're looking at leases townwide, with the exception of Board of Education. By charter, the treasurer is responsible for custodialship of a bunch of official documents, which include leases, inland wetland deposits, easements, anything that's official in paper is stored with the treasurer, and among them was the leases. So I, for the RTM committee, updated the lease inventory. There is 31 leases that we have in the finance department, of which 15 are $1 a year leases and 2 of them are $10 a year leases. One of them is the Cascade revolver lease down here at the bottom of Greenwich Avenue. And there's a bunch of leases which are not necessarily considered leases, but rental agreements. So I've been working with them, and my staff has been assistant, and we've been scanning all the documents in and sending them over to a committee on the Finance Committee for the RTM. The plan is they're going to do all the work as far as analyzing the leases and try to get total population, and their analysis is going to determine whether or not, or try to quantify how much a $1 a year lease may be costing us. And the goal is to have this project completed in January, February, and the Finance Committee will put together a report, and report that to the RTM in March. So that's basically what this lease accounting project is on page 1. Any questions on that project?
Oh, sure, Mr. Finger.
Peter, you said that the members of the RTM Finance Committee will do an analysis as to find out what the cost of each of those $1 leases actually is to the town? Am I correct? Is that what you said?
Yes.
How, I mean, are they also going to factor in if, in fact, those leases have a financial benefit to the town? And for example, if the organization that is leasing a particular facility provides a public benefit, whether it be youth programs or things of that sort, is that netted out against whatever the cost is?
I don't really want to speak for them, but I believe that's the direction they're going in. It's led by Rob Pirelli-Minetti and Gordon Ennis, the chairman of the Finance Committee. And I think that's where they're going with this.
I would hope so, because there's not necessarily just a net cost on a lot of those leases.
Mr. Simon?
If the RTM has a statement of work on this project, and you could obtain that and send that to the members of the BET, I think that would be helpful. I
Yes.
mean, things I'm looking at are, what rights do they have what usage rights do they have, what rights do they have for subcontracts, and other items that might be similar to that. And I don't know if this overlaps at all with what the town Properties Committee is doing of the POCD. Peter would know that. Whether this is at all, whether the town Properties Committee is.
We're now working in conjunction with them. The initial intent and directive to the town Properties Committee was to inventory all the properties, to look at their value, arrive at a value, to document what the present uses are, and to potentially recommend alternate uses if there were those available. Clearly, there are things that the present use is the present use, but particularly as it relates to other needs that the town may have, which have been identified through the 10-year plan.
And so
this is a complement to it in terms of.
Okay. And I would think we'd try to coordinate these two efforts to get a more comprehensive picture of what we're doing with at least these 32 properties.
Mr. Huffman?
Have the auditors been involved in the discussions as you've proceeded with this project on the leases?
Bloom Shapiro?
Yeah.
No, not at all.
So they haven't? Okay.
Further discussion on this, or do you have any comments on any other matter?
I just wanted a quick update on the CIP, and then I'll take questions. Led by the first selectman, the CIP committee met last week. We had a meeting for a couple hours, and the first selectman has scheduled another meeting for Wednesday of this week to go over the CIP. First selectman Peter Tessie did have a public hearing on October 26th, and there were a number of speakers. The CIP committee is ranking the projects right now. Most of us are finished because the deadline is tomorrow. There's 66 general fund and 14 other meaning sewer maintenance, sewer improvements, a couple Nathaniel Witherell and a couple for the golf course. They total out at $76 million, a little over $76 million. However, two of them equal over $53 million, which is the Greenwich High School Auditorium, the MISA project, and the Central Firehouse, which leaves us about $23 million. A few million less than last year. Last year, we had slightly over $27 million in capital projects. So the CIP process is ongoing, and basically, that's my monthly report on the CIP process. And now I'll take, unless there's a question on the CIP process, I'll take any questions.
Mr. Pellegrino?
Peter, under cash management, you noted that the town has received $772,000 in reimbursement from the state for Hamilton Avenue. Could you shed a little more information in terms
Yes.
of
Okay.
how much is possibly outstanding and also what's happening with Glenville?
Okay, this was quite a surprise. This was unbudgeted revenue. This is general fund revenue. We were notified by the state that there were over $1 million in each project accrued and owed to us. But what the state of Connecticut does is, because it's school construction reimbursement, they retain a portion of them, and within anywhere from 2 to 5 years, they'll audit the projects. And once they release, depending on the eligibility, the cost reimbursed, they'll release the final funds. So this $722,000 was quite a surprise. The difference between Hamilton Avenue School and Glenville School is Hamilton Avenue School was paid through the mill rate. It wasn't bonded. So this goes straight to general fund. And this, as I said before, was an unbudgeted revenue, which is, in the monthly economic report, is good news. The Glenville School, which is bonded, only simply reduces the bonded amount, and that does not go to the general fund, and that goes to the bonded fund. So between the two, there was about $3 million that were being held by the state, and this was a surprise to get to 722.
Further discussion on any topic of the comptroller's report? Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The reference in here to the RFP for deferred savings, defined benefits, and defined contribution plans, I just want to bring the attention that the deadline for submission has been extended from tomorrow, actually Wednesday, to the 7th of January next year.
Thank you.
I have one question out of that.
Further discussion on any portion of the comptroller's report, Mr. Simon?
So on the next to last page, the cash flow forecast, which we as a finance board pay attention to. So not only our cash flow balance at the end of November is $72.7 million, which is $29 million more than a year ago.
Yes.
And we seem to be running at that constantly high pace. And the reason is, we didn't tax $29 million more dollars.
Okay, the bulk of that was, I think, 16 million is between the two June 30ths. Let me
Okay,
just double check. It went from, to 16, it went from 12.2 million to 28.3, which is in the lower right part of the cash flow forecast. So we picked up 16 million accumulated for all of last year. So 16 of it is basically the, from year to year.
the difference in the mill rate against the,
Well, a lot of it's also the modified pay-as-you-go unwinding.
that would be 6 million?
That was, but there was about 15 million was last year. This year is about 6 million. So you have a combination of the 2 years of pay-as-you-go, and then if you looked at the tax collector's review, we're a couple $1 million ahead of last year, and the tax collections are tremendous. We're curious in finance to see how this plays out in January when all of the collections are in, to see how great the collection rate is. But right now it looks very good. We also, as I discussed, you had $722,000 in the unbudgeted revenues in the Hamilton Avenue. You had a tourism grant nobody expected. Everybody in the state got it. We got over $250,000. Your conveyance taxes, we lowered the budget, is real good. It's great. The building inspection is, I think we're already at 70-something% of budget, and we haven't even reached the 6-month mark. So all of these thrown together point out that that's why the cash flow is increased dramatically from November to November.
So it indicates a very strong balance sheet.
Fund balance, correct.
And income statement.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's important because, we as a town depend upon the cash being available.
Further questions or discussion on the comptroller's report? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the comptroller's report? So moved. Moved by Mr. Pellegrino, second by Mr. Norton. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Item 6 now comes before us, acceptance of treasurer's report showing investment portfolio activity for the month of November 2010. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Norton, second by Mr. Pellegrino. Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Items 7, 8, and 9 now come before us. Those are the BET Standing Committee reports, the BET Liaison reports, the BET Special Project Team reports, including in those reports Nathaniel Witherell, both regular and building committee, and our revaluation Special Project Team report. Audit, investment, and HR will be dealing with some HR issues later on in the agenda. Does the revaluation team have anything to add other than what's in the report, or wish to offer any other information? Our revaluation team is still meeting with the assessor on an ongoing basis. Even though the reval is out, obviously questions come up, whether it's through citizens, interested citizens, or otherwise. And so that special project team continues to work with the assessor to ensure that if there are discrepancies or issues, that we can address them before our meetings, and they will continue to do so as long as it's necessary to do so. So thank you. Any questions on any of the other reports? Okay. Hearing none. Chairman's report. Let me first say that there have been, I won't say numerous, but certainly several questions from concerned citizens regarding the reval anytime that they come in and they're addressed to me. They either get forwarded on directly to the assessor or to the special project team, or if in fact, if it's a simple enough response that either can be answered in the frequently asked questions portion or through the website, then we send the concerned citizen to that area. In fact, most recently there was one citizen that complained that there were not enough available hearings, informal hearings available, and then when there was, in fact, the first selectman got involved because the email was sent to him. We worked together looking for why it was that this citizen was having a problem, and in fact it was, for whatever reason, a miscommunication either between the citizen and the website or something that went on. But in fact, there were plenty of appointments available, and the citizen thanked everyone who had responded. So, as soon as we can get on top of this, we do. We have essentially completed the evaluations for the comptroller and the assessor for 2010. Ms. Barton and I have worked on those evaluations, and we intend to have them proposed at our January meeting. And also at that time, we'll be looking at the SMART goals already for 2011. Again, we're on the off cycle from almost everybody else in town because of we're on a calendar year basis. Ms. Barton and I have also looked into and continue to work with the law department, and I think our goal, depending on what the law department actually comes back with, will be to see if we can amend that process by having the comptroller and the assessor then go on the fiscal year basis to be consistent with all other MC employees. And quite frankly, we think it'll work better with incoming BETs to have that 6-month lag, as opposed to doing it one around the holidays and two as a new board can come in every 2 years. So we'll be proposing that sometime in 2011. And lastly, I've been informed by the first selectman that, I'll say tentatively, although I think it's pretty firm, that there will be a presentation regarding the central fire station here at the town hall meeting room on January 6th at 7 p.m. I highly encourage all BET members to attend that meeting. It's an important meeting about an important project in town, and that's right now scheduled for January 6th. So if you can make it, please attend. And if you can't, let me know in advance, and we'll work with the First Selectman's office to get you the information that's going to be presented, so that you can at least review that at home, and maybe even it'll be televised if we can get that accomplished as well.
Should I let you know now?
Sure.
I can't make it.
Okay. So we'll try to get that information, have the packets readily available to finance, and then we can send that out. So thank you. Other than that, I can say that the process that was probably put in place at least 5, 6, 7 years ago with departments living within their budgets is working and working well. Obviously, you're seeing the number of items or the decreased number of items that come before us each month, allowing us to work on some other issues. And so I think that's what you're seeing, even tonight with some of the matters that are before us. As we move forward for 2011, I do see the reval continuing to be an important topic that citizens wish to discuss. And so I encourage you, to the extent that you can be helpful to citizens, just to forward the questions to Ted and get them resolved as quickly as possible. And if you think it's a bigger issue that encompasses many more citizens, let us know. But so far, we've heard of no systemic issues relative to the reval. Ms. Tarkington?
I don't know if this is appropriate time. When you asked if there was any points in our revaluation team report that we should bring up, the fact that you brought up the appointments which are available from the municipal revaluation services conducting the informal hearings, the public should be aware that in addition to normal town hall business hours, there are evenings appointments available and also Saturday appointments available. So Ted and the assessor's office have made an effort to really accommodate the residences at their convenience.
Thank you. Okay, that's all I have for my report. At this time, it is 7 o'clock. And so pursuant to our previous motion to take up bullet point 2 under item 12, accessibility of information pertaining to land use factors. So with that, I'll ask the town assessor to come forward. Let me give the BET a little bit of background on this. My understanding is that a concerned citizen, or I should say an interested citizen, approached the assessor to make available information that was not already available on a disc or on a CD, and that the assessor had indicated primarily pursuant to our previous vote several months ago regarding information that was that would be available online, that was not his decision, but in fact a decision of the BET. That interested citizen then contacted me, and certainly it's not my decision alone to make. And so what you have in your packets this month is an explanation as to the information that this interested citizen would like to have made available on a disc or on a CD. And so that's what I forwarded on to all of you here tonight. I want to be clear about this, though, and I would like the assessor to confirm this publicly, that in fact the information that is being requested by this individual on CD is currently available by coming into the assessor's office at one of the terminals and accessing that information there, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So just to be clear again, it is not that we're denying access to the information or that the information is somehow privileged or something of that nature. In fact, it is public information, but that public information that we require someone to come into town hall as opposed to having it online or on a CD that can then be taken away from town hall. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And with that, why don't I just ask for a motion to take this matter up? That way we'll put it on for a discussion, and then we can vote on the matter or do whatever we wish to do with it.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino.
Second.
Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion, Mr. Finger.
I just want to correct something. The information that the gentleman was referring to is not, in fact, on the terminals in the assessor's office. It's available in the field cards, which are hard copies. If you walk in the assessor's office, the front desk or the counter, right below the counter on the customer side, are a whole series of probably 30 to 40 binders alphabetized by street address where all the field cards and all this information is available.
And the information is available on our maintenance card, but not on our public record card, so that they would have to request a maintenance card to get it from our file. But they can copy it directly from the field card that's in the binders.
Okay, but just to clarify this point, it's not accessible on the terminal. No. It's accessible by hard copy that can then be further copied.
Yes.
but
Hold on, Mr. Simon, then we'll come back.
I don't think there's been a lot of thought on our part as to what information we made available on the terminal, what information we necessarily put on the ProVal disk, in terms of either intentionally including or excluding this information. And I think if we're going to go forward with discussing this after this meeting, we can just, I think we got a lot of positive feedback from what people want to see in the public domain. And I think this is the type of another data field that we could also consider using that same process of at least discussing this publicly and getting the public input as to whether people want to see that or not. I myself have no objection to it, but, who knows what other people object to.
Well, you raise an interesting point. I do recall several months ago when we took this matter up for the first time about making information online that is readily available in many other communities. We certainly heard from the public, and it was a fairly sizable portion of the public that indicated that they did not wish for that information to go online and be readily available.
Right.
And I think for the most part, the initial reaction of the BET was positive in terms of putting the information online until we actually heard from the public. And then we ultimately voted against it. I just don't want to be in that similar position where we're too far ahead of what the citizens want in terms of the information being readily available. And so the part that I didn't quite understand, Mr. Simon, when you use the word positive about the citizen input in terms of the information we've made available, it's not just a matter of whether it's available at the assessor's office. This would take it to be accessible outside of the assessor's office.
Right. I don't think anybody made a determination that we should either include or exclude this. I think this is just historical accident as to where it ended up, not on the screens necessarily, and not on the ProVal disk. So we didn't make a positive decision to do one thing or another. Before I would go and include this, again, I recommend the public input process. I assume, although I shouldn't say that if we actually wanted to include this on the ProVal disk or we wanted to include this information on the screens, that could be done.
Yes, it could be done. We're using a standard routine from the software supplier, but it could be added on at minimal expense.
Well, we have not heard from the public on this. We certainly have heard from one individual who would like it made available. I suspect there is somewhat of a timing issue on this, having the reval currently out there and being used for, I suspect, either the informal hearings or the formal hearings.
Well, I'll comment on that.
But, okay.
Because if someone wanted to take a particular property and find out all the influences on that street or any of the neighborhoods, then you would go through the field cards, which are arranged in the book by street, and you could say my house has 20% negative wetlands or traffic and nobody else on my block has that, and that information is readily accessible for a specific property. And I think that's an important part of preparing yourself for the informal hearings. And I think and we've done a very good job, I think, of providing that information. That's why I don't think the information, at least in that regard, you don't need to provide it in a more timely fashion for those people preparing to do one particular informal hearing.
Good comments. I'm just not sure that it's moved the discussion along in terms of what's the sense of the board tonight.
May I ask a question?
Sure. Mr. Pellegrino.
I guess the general question would be, how is the citizen disserviced right now? So is the question here is whether it should or should not be available through the
You want me to
website?
tell you why?
Sure, anyway.
Hold on. So the question was, how is anybody disserviced by status quo? The response from Mr. Kelly was, well, they have to come to town hall. And so with that, let me give it back to the special project team that I know met with the assessor on this. So Ms. Tarkington and then Mr. Finger.
First, I was actually going to ask Ted a question. Ted, how much does a data disk cost, and who normally would buy a data disk? I mean, a town resident doesn't because he probably isn't familiar with it. Will go to the terminals where can get the information or the many books. But who buys the data disk? How many you sell a year, approximately, or especially in a revow year? And how much does a data disk cost? Just to give us a little background here.
The data disks cost $30. They're bought primarily by people who want repetitive information for developing mailing lists or developing information about real estate, such as real estate salesmen. We probably sell about 30 in a reval year and maybe 20 in other years. So it's not a big demand item, and it's used primarily from mass users rather than individuals. There are a few individuals that buy them, but very few.
Thank you.
Mr. Finger.
And Ted, correct me if I'm wrong. My impression is that for the average taxpayer, property owner in the town of Greenwich, which 99.9% of us are, if we were to look at this disk to find out this particular information, it would probably be my understanding is that it would be far more confusing for the average person to find that information than if they just went to the assessor's office, found 200 Field Point Road, and looked at the field card. I mean, that's much simpler. Otherwise, it might, I don't know whether 99.9% of us would be able to make heads or tails out of the information on the ProVal disk.
You are correct. There's over 400 different items of information on these disks. It's not at all user-friendly. And we give the people that buy it a copy of the layout, and then they have to try to figure out where things are located and how to access it. So it's much, much easier to come into the office. And right now, even online, a person who has a computer can go in and look for both the assessments along their street of their neighbors, and they can look for sales information online. So most people are doing it that way.
Thank you.
Well, so does that motivate us then to allow for the additional information to be put online, or as motivation to keep the information to those who can read it? The professionals, if you will, the 20 or 30 that can read it already, do we then make it available to those 20 or 30?
Well, if I go back to our discussion in April of 2009 or May of 2009, the decision by this board was not to include information from the field card on the internet because the public spoke fairly loud and clear that they did not want that information so easily available. The gentleman that made this request, in the letter that was included in our packet, he makes the statement that the purpose of the ProVal, and I'm reading, the purpose, page 4, the purpose of the ProVal disk is to provide the public all data in electronic form, what is presented on the printable public field cards. That's incorrect as it relates to Greenwich, because this board, contrary to what the assessor had recommended, this board made the decision that we were not going to do that.
Mr. Pellegrino.
I guess I'd say two things. One is to Mr. Kelly. Bill, if someone wants an informal hearing, they're going to have to come down to the town hall. So I don't see where they're being disserviced, because they could come before the official meeting time and look at the card or the information. And based on what I've just heard, specifically how the public has reacted to this in the past, I just don't see where it's a disservice to our residents, to our citizens, by not providing this. And so I would not be in favor of this.
Mr. Simon.
All right, so I have two different thoughts. One, I think we should actually provide the information at the public access terminal. So if someone comes and looks at the terminal, they want to look at their own house, they can see whatever land influence factors are being applied to their property. Because even those books are not always accessible and the books aren't always available. And he refers to it being a software bug, but I don't see any problem personally putting on the terminal that's in your office these factors. That was my own opinion. Two, the person who would be most disserviced by not having this on ProVal is someone who wanted to go through the database and find anomalies and write letters to people and say, perhaps you want to appeal your taxes, and therefore I'll represent you. That would be the person who would be most disserviced.
I don't have a problem with that.
But before I would open that door, I would like to get other people's, the public's input into that process.
Here's what I'm hearing, I think.
Good luck.
I think I'm hearing that it doesn't sound like anybody is ready to approve this tonight. And then I'm hearing at the very, at most, there might be members, maybe the consensus, to at least try to seek other input into whether or not this information should be made available. And if that is the case, then my suggestion would be to ask the special project team and the assessor to reach out to especially those individuals who reached out to us back in April of '09 to see if there's any interest in us doing this, if this is a different type of issue or a similar issue, so that we can at least take the pulse of the community on some level before we take action. That's sort of what I'm hearing, or I'm hearing just vote it down. I mean, so I'm just trying to understand where the board is headed. Mr. Kelly?
Just two thoughts. One, I agreed with Mr. Simon with respect to making that information available in terminals. I think that's a good idea, and that's an instruction or direction that we should give to the assessor tonight, number one. And I also agree that this is not something that has to be done right away, and certainly we could await public input. I mean, so I would agree with those two assessments and do that, take that action tonight.
Okay.
Just either vote it down or push it off till February and see if we want to do anything.
Okay, so let me try to, before an actual vote is taken. So let's first take the position about making the information available at a terminal. So is that possible, and if so, is there a cost associated with that, and if so, is it a nominal cost?
There's two formats that we released information. One is called maintenance, and the other one is called the public. And they were both designed by our software supplier. The only problem we would have with giving access to the maintenance machine is it would give a lot of information about changes that are underway. For example, we're inputting all the changes of the informal hearings right now, and they appear on our maintenance machine. So that if we put the maintenance on so that they could see the land influence factors, they'd not only see that, but they'd see all of the other work going on in the department, including new construction for the following year and so forth. So I think before I committed to doing that, I'd rather work with Bob and see if there's something that we can do that might provide the information requested without giving out too much information.
On a terminal?
Yes.
So can we then table this to, I'm not sure that's the Robert's Rules official position on this, postpone this matter to January and ask our revaluation team to solicit public input on this and to through the assessor's office to try to get a better picture as to whether or not there would be any real objection to this information being made available. Mr. Finger?
I, as a member of the reval team, I don't have a problem with that, but I don't know that from a practical standpoint, we would be able to get an answer back to this board by our January meeting. I mean, we're going to the holidays, obviously.
So is February a better position? And that still would, and our vote then would still be before the deadline for the formal hearings.
Right.
So it might not help with the informal process, but it certainly would help if we decide to make a change to do it then.
And let's not forget, this information is available to the public. I mean, it's not like it's not available. It is available in the assessor, readily available in the assessor's office, like a lot of it.
I think that's an important point. Okay, can I have then a motion to refer this to the special project team to bring it back to the BET in February of 2011? Moved by Mr. Huffman, second by Mr. Pellegrino. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, 11-0-0. And that's to include also, if we can at least get it on one of the terminals, and you'll start working on that to talk with the special project team anyway.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, now going back to item 11, old business, method of electing BET. Mr. Nort.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I move that the BET request from the Law Department changes to the charter that would result in the direct election of the members of the BET that would allow for a majority-minority BET in accordance with state statute on a 4-year staggered term basis. And I so move.
Moved by Mr. Norton,
Second.
second by Mr. Campbell. Before I open it up for discussion, let me just say that there's been surprisingly little conversation about this on one level and probably greater conversation internally within the BET on this topic. This was an issue that arose last budget cycle. There was a sense that the BET should be, that the decisions of the BET should be vetoed, and then that flowed into a discussion that the BET is not accountable to anyone or their actions to anyone. And then, in fact, we were not elected. I think there are a variety of discussion points that flow from that, but I suspect, and I've been on the BET now for about a decade or so, and this topic does come up. The last time it came up, Mr. Crummick and I did a PowerPoint presentation and went to various interest groups and neighborhood associations and discussed this topic. A vote of this magnitude would require 7 affirmative votes of the BET, and that's why the motion as presented is much more broad. Before we have the law department make any changes to the charter, it's in this broad fashion to see if this is the direction we want to go. But in order for us to pass this, it would require 7 affirmative votes. And so with that, I'll open it up for discussion. Sure.
Do you have your PowerPoint with you?
That was handed out at the last, actually 2 BET meetings ago. We had a public hearing on the topic, and at that time, the PowerPoint was presented.
2 months ago?
2 months ago.
Yes.
2 months ago.
It was? Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll have to refresh my recollection on that PowerPoint.
Our esteemed clerk has a copy if you'd like to see it.
Oh,
I didn't bring mine
I'd love
with
Mr.
me.
Pellegrino to send that down to me at some point. Yeah. Yes, that would be interesting. So what is the purpose of this motion?
Purpose of this motion would be to affect changes to the charter that would result in direct elections
Change the charter of the town.
of the town,
For what purpose?
direct elections. It would end up being 4-year terms for the BET, staggered,
4-year terms,
staggered,
staggered.
and majority-minority representation.
So there would be a majority BET of one party up to what, 8 people?
I believe state statute then would come into play, and you could have a maximum of 8.
I think it's 9.
Oh, so-
I think it's 9.
9? Well, 8 or 9, and the wizard is saying 9. I always thought, when I was working with Mr. Crummick, we always were under the assumption that it was an 8-4 split.
So it would be, 8-4 or 9-3. It would be 8 or 9 Republicans and 3 or 4 Democrats, is that,
Or vice versa,
but, okay.
or any number in between.
In between, be a direct.
So in an off year, just to go through the example, in an off year, in a particular year, because you have 4-year staggered terms, only 6 positions are up as opposed to now all 12 positions being up.
Right,
And depending on the makeup of the 6 who were not up for election,
right.
would would then determine, let's say it was an even 3-3
Right,
on the current board,
right.
right? Each party then could put up another 5 positions,
Right.
and then up to the 8-4. So all 5 from one party could theoretically win that election.
So in all practicality, we would be moving to a board that would have a predominance of one party over another instead of this 6-6 split. Is that the intent, Mr. Norton? Is that what or?
Yes, because in most communities throughout the state, the finance board do have a balance between a minority and majority party as opposed to the equal representation that exists in Greenwich.
So because other communities do it?
Yeah, hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll go back. I apologize.
It's fine.
I was looking at Mr. Kelly.
I apologize.
Did you have all your questions answered?
Oh, no, I've got tons more. But I defer.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
If I may ask Mr. Norton a question about some language in that motion. What is meant by direct elections? Are you suggesting that there should be a change in that the respective town political committees would not be making the nominations and essentially making the selection, and that it would be open to the entire town electorate? So, for example, if there were 3 seats available, are you suggesting that there would be more than 3 members of each party who would be running for those seats, or would it still be limited as it is now, that each party, in this case Democrats and Republicans, would only nominate 3?
The direct election is meant to be
That this board either vote this up or vote this down before we go ahead and do that. Because if the sense of this board, more than the sense, at least 7 affirmative votes, don't vote to move this forward, then I don't see us going to the law department to actually make those changes, to have the actual charter changes in front of us. But once again, I leave it up to this body. If anyone here wants that to happen instead, then I have no problem sort of moving this off until our January meeting and getting the law department to put exact language in front of us. Mr. Kelly.
Can I ask the proponent a question through you? Because I'm hearing 2 different things. Because I'm intrigued, so I'm telling you that. Because I am troubled by the lack of competition, but that's the one that intrigues me, the competition issue. So if this is about competition, I'm interested. If it's about majority rule, I'm not necessarily interested. Because competition would be great if we could have some competition on the board with, say, 7 Democrats or 8 Republicans and 8 Democrats running for 6 seats. Now, I assume that's probably a charter change, right?
Right.
To get that? Because then we would have competition. The people would actually have a choice among a number of candidates. Because I do worry about the power that is in the Democratic Party and the power that's in the Republican Party of those people who make the nominations of us to this board. Now, right now, I believe we have a fabulous board. We have very talented people, and we have tremendous bipartisanship that works very well. And I think, to echo what Mr. Campbell said, I firmly believe that it's not broken. But I am troubled by the fact that I have a certain group, pretty much appointing the 6 Democrats and appointing the 6 Republicans. We know that. We know that's what happens. And as a member of the public, I would be somewhat offended by that and voting in that regard. So if we were talking about competition, then I'd be intrigued by this. But if we're just talking about majority rule, so there can be 8 Republicans and 4 Democrats, it's changing the whole system that has worked very well in the past by the bipartisanship, where you have to get Democrats and Republicans to agree on things. And I'm trying to be honest here and discuss this openly with you as to my feelings.
Mr. Chair.
But-
So at the last time that this came up before the BET, and that model is, in fact, I think what you're talking about is what the current Board of Ed model is. Whereas it's a competition amongst the same party members.
Yeah.
And
I thought was
those
great.
who were opposed to it and who still either are opposed to it, at least the arguments that were made back in '05 or whenever this came up,
Right.
was that's more of a primary happening at the time of an election. If you want a primary, then there should be a primary at the appropriate time. And there are, all I'm stating are the arguments that were made against that the last time the BET took this
In
up.
the primary,
That
you
it's-
have the 6 people voting who vote in primaries, you don't have the general populace,
That,
right?
right, and that you have arguably people from other parties voting for the people of the opposite party,
Right.
and making those determinations. So the argument that was made is you're only halfway there. It's competitive, but competitive internally as opposed to externally, whether that resulted in an 8-4 split or some other split, majority, minority.
Could I, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman?
Okay?
Mr.
With that, Mr. Norton, and then,
There is nothing inherent in this resolution that implies you could have more than that which is allowed by state statute. So if it's an 8-4 majority, which is allowed by state statute, then this motion addresses the fact that you can have up to 8 nominees and no more.
Mr. Campbell.
I want to address Mr. Kelly's point. I mean, it's hard. It's sort of you having your cake and eating it too. I mean, if you want competition, there'll be winners and losers, and that's the price, and that's how we do it for all of our other elective offices. The oddity here is this is an elective office, but we don't allow for winners and losers. We say that one party can only nominate 6. And we have a board of 12, and so guess what? Each party nominates 6. If you won't let a party win more than 6 seats, they're not going to field more than 6 candidates. Parties are really not in the business of trying to do for the state or for the town what the state or the town won't do for its citizens. If the town of Greenwich wants the citizens of Greenwich to really have a competitive choice as to who should serve on this Board of Estimate, then I suggest that you have to allow for as many as one more than half, as many as 7 of the 12 seats to be held by one party, or you cannot get competitive elections between the parties. You just, that won't happen. As for the idea that, Democrats should nominate extra Democrats for their 6 seats and throw that choice to the people in November, and Republicans should do the same for their seats. But that's not a competitive election, and that's not the dialogue that we want. I mean, we want to have a real dialogue. That is, we want candidates to feel that they're not just competing, myself against Mr. Mason or Mr. Kelly against Mr. Finger. We'd like to perhaps the debate will turn into, Mr. Mason against Mr. Finger or myself against Mr. Who knows which way the debate is going to go, but if you artificially restrict the debate and just say, well, now you have these few candidates over here, you can choose amongst them, and you have a few over here and you can choose amongst them, but, they're not really running against each other, and you can't, I mean, that's not a competitive election, and that's not going to really give any greater legitimacy to this body, and I think we'll be in this, back in the same position where we have been, which is to say, gee, is the BET really elected? And that's the question people ask today. And I think it's very unfortunate. It comes, again, at a cost, this limitation, and the cost is our connection and our mandate from the voters. We don't have one, and I don't think we can as long as we keep it this way. And I will note that most towns in Connecticut do not do this. Most towns that have, yes, they even call them boards of estimate and taxation. Go over to Norwalk, they allow for majority control. Go to Fairfield, they have majority control. I mean, it's by far the more common practice is to allow for competitive elections like that.
Sorry, Ms. Barton.
This board was formed 101 years ago, and we celebrated our 100th anniversary last year amid great applause for the bipartisanship that it demonstrates and the values that bipartisanship brings to the board. We are not a legislative board, which would be elected in an open competitive election. We are not the executives of the town who are elected in open competitive elections. We are a finance board specially formed to ensure the fiscal integrity of the town. At the time we were formed, the town was subject to hugely shoddy accounting practices, obvious patronage, and a variety of other fiscal mismanagement. After the board was formed, when it was formed without bipartisanship, the town nearly went bankrupt in the 1930s. As a result, in 1933 and 1939, charter amendments were passed to ensure that the board would be both bipartisan and responsible for the town's fiscal condition. The board consists of 12 members under our charter. Neither party is allowed to nominate more than 6 under our charter. Therefore, all 6 nominees do get elected. But the public has a vote. There is a tie-breaking vote in the majority party, which can be exercised under certain circumstances specified in the charter by our chair. Now, I recall from last year's celebration that the chairs in the last 100 years were all Republicans, which I'm sure will come as an enormous shock to all of you. But the choice for the voters is who will be the majority on this board and who will be the minority, not whether we should abandon bipartisanship, which has served us well over the years. I believe we'd be doing the town a disservice by changing a system that has worked well for over 70 years. We work well together, we're collegial, we're bipartisan. In many ways, we're nonpartisan. Tonight's discussion is probably the most partisan discussion I've participated in my 5 years on this board, and I regret that. I don't think it's in the public's interest to have this kind of debate. We are all, Republicans and Democrats alike, doing the absolute best we can to maintain the financial integrity of the town and to serve our community. It's a privilege and a great responsibility to serve in this role, and I absolutely will vote no against any suggestion that we should change it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further discussion? Okay, so once again, this would require 7 affirmative votes to simply pass the sort of torch along to the law department and have them draft charter changes to the effect of whether you want to use direct or competitive elections, 4-year staggered terms, and obviously the details can be then debated, but this would simply to move it to the law department for drafting purposes, but certainly with the intent to change the status quo. I want to make sure that's clear with everyone. All right. All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Raise your hands just so I can. Okay. All those opposed?
No.
Okay. That's a vote of 6-5. That fails. Okay. Thank you. I will disagree with Ms. Barton on one instance. I do think it's not a disservice to the community to have this discussion. I think it's important for this board to discuss it. It does come up probably too frequently, but it is important that we have it, and whether we're reminding ourselves or the public as to how we got here, I think that's important. I think it's also important to recognize that you can't have it both ways, as Mr. Campbell has indicated. And so we will continue.
I would disagree with the chairman on those remarks.
We will continue to do what we can.
I think it's improper. I call point of order.
State your point of order.
The point of order is you're agreeing with a member of your party on a legitimate discussion that we had here, that you can't have it both ways. I may take exception to that.
I also agreed with Ms. Barton in the fact that we do the best we can, and we do put a lot of time and effort into this. So point of order not accepted. In any event, this issue will be put to rest, will not be brought up by this chairman, at least in the foreseeable future, unless some other issue arises that compels this body to take it up. But I don't see that happening anytime in the near term. Item 12 now comes before us under new business approval of the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, federal and single audits, and acceptance of the management letter for the year ending June 30th, 2010.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Norton.
Mr. Chairman, the Audit Committee met on December 9th to receive from our outside auditor, Bloom Shapiro, their report, which is the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, the single federal audit and the single state audit, as well as the management letter. I'd like to make some preliminary remarks in regard to it. Basically, it's in the report that I presented, but just for the public, the presentation by our independent auditor is made on three bases. It's made on the basis of generally accepted accounting principles, as known as GAAP. It's made on a budgetary basis, and it's made on an accrual basis. And subsequently, the fund balance that appears for each will vary, and the fund balance that we have on a GAAP basis is going to be less than it is on a budgetary basis, because some of the items on the budgetary basis are not will be specifically excluded or not included the same way in GAAP. Prior to setting in motion this process last spring, the Audit Committee met with our outside independent auditor, and our concern, as long as I've been chair of this committee, has been to our internal controls, because I believe that the Finance Department is only as strong as its internal controls. This year, we are concerned again with our internal controls, but we asked if our outside auditor would be also concerned in considering areas of which our internal controls could be weakest, and those where fraud could be potentially a problem for the town of Greenwich. We don't have any specifics, and that wasn't the thrust of our concern. But nevertheless, we asked going through the process that our independent auditors, Bloom Shapiro, identify areas in which fraud could potentially be an issue. In the management report that has been attached to this completed report, in which there are 13 items, there is an item in this report which is addressed by Bloom Shapiro, which is a town-wide overview, and there are 4 items in that area which specifically address potential areas of potential fraud. And the biggest of those is a request where have all department heads or their designee verify on a biweekly basis that all the people who are being paid, meaning all the employees, are actual employees. The issue here is whether or not we have phantom or ghost employees. The next item on there are 4 items that are included in it. The next item has to do with journal vouchers, which is another area in which potential fraud could exist if there is no verification of the actual journal voucher entry. The point that I'm trying to make is that the Audit Committee will continue to be concerned with areas in which fraud could be a potential, because we think that this is the area in which the greatest weakness in our internal controls will exist. As our meeting on the 9th of December, the Audit Committee progressed, we approved and recommended that this full board accept and approve the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report and the attendant management letter with the 13 items, 6 of which are carrying forward from the previous year, one of which has already been addressed by the Controller's Office, and one that will take effect with the beginning of the next fiscal year. And I so move.
Is there a second? Mr. Pellegrino seconds that motion. Further discussion? Mr. Huffman.
I recognize the tremendous amount of work that's been done by the staff and also by the Audit Committee. But I'm troubled that this package hit our desks or our homes on Friday evening, in many cases for the first time. And I think that in the future, since we know that we need to have this completed by the end of December, both as a requirement as well as in anticipation of the borrowing schedule for January, that efforts be made to bring the audit process through earlier, because this could have been a process that perhaps started more quickly after June 30th and could be completed prior to presentation at their December meeting of the Audit Committee.
Mr. Chairman?
Suggestion is well taken, and we'll go into that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to respond to that specifically because under GASB rules, which is Government Accounting Standards Board, the town can hold open its books for 60 days after the conclusion of the fiscal year, which means it can hold open its books until the 30th of August, which means that the process really can't begin, the auditing process, in effect, cannot begin until September 1st. And between September 1st and when we had the audit completed, which was done approximately the 20th of November, included in that is a list of all contingency deferred liabilities, which we have to get from the various town departments, including the law department. There are some constraints in being able to begin the audit process prior to September 1.
Mr. Huffman, in that light, though, however, to the extent that we can either get out drafts or there's a further interest, we should be made known of that and then at least be involved in discussion if individuals, members so choose. So I think we can do a better job at that. You're right.
Thank you.
Further discussion, Mr. Pellegrino and then Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say to the public, for those citizens who are genuinely interested in the financial affairs of the town, this is an excellent document to pore over and truly understand. If there's a second document, it would be the prospectuses for our bond financings. I think between the CAFRA, this document, and the prospectuses, the citizens that are truly interested in understanding the town's finances would be well served.
Mr. Kelly?
2 points. One, we got it like a week before for the audit committee, so certainly that could be sent out the week earlier to everybody, and that would be a good procedural change, and I would agree with Mr. Huffman on that. 2, I wanted to say that Ms. Rosito, who made the presentation to us from Bloom Shapiro, did a really excellent job, and we went at it for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and I was very impressed with her and her presentation. So,
Thank you. Mr. Mason?
On this particular item, earlier this evening, I had made mention about, I was questioning if it was online yet, if the annual report was online, and I, on behalf of the BET, if it would be possible, if you saw fit, to a quick letter to the RTM included in their next month's meeting package, telling them it's online, things that they can find in there on behalf of the BET. A majority of the meetings that I attend, budget overview, finance committee, a lot of questions that are asked in those meetings, the answers are right in the CAFR. I mean, and I think
we have the capability of pushing an email now to all RTM members, isn't that right?
I don't think every one of them has that.
Well, but
I'm not sure if there is a master.
Not yet.
the wizard speaks again. I mean,
we know who the wizard is.
I tell you, from election of BET to RTM synopsis, good idea. We'll if we can do that. In effect, if we can't push the email, we'll get out a letter, get it in the pack, and at least give them the website address to go directly to the link. I think that's a good idea. Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, just I'd like to add one further comment here. Although Mr. Norton mentioned that the CAFR is prepared using as one of the methodologies modified accrual accounting, it's very important that people understand it's these financial statements, the modified accrual accounting, that the rating agencies are looking at when they're rating the town of Greenwich, not the cash statements that we use for our general fund. So I think hence the importance, the comment that Mr. Pellegrino said, of RTM and other members of our community reviewing these statements. It becomes much more important in today's environment that they understand the accounting presentations that we must comply with.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Mr. Norton?
On behalf of the audit committee, I move to accept the Town of Greenwich Federal Single Audit Report. Our vote on the 9th of December was 3-0 to accept this.
Is there is a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mason. Although, there's further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Mr. Norton?
Mr. Chairman, there's a third item, and that's on behalf of the audit committee, I move to accept, to have the BET accept a single state audit report voted and approved, recommended by the audit committee on December 9th.
Second? Mr. Pellegrino, discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, 11-0-0 for all three of those. Thank you, Mr. Norton. Third bullet point under new business.
Then we have to do the management letter.
No, actually, the motion to accept the management letter was included in the motion
For
to
this-
accept the capital.
Well, there's approval of the capital and acceptance of the management letter.
Right, and I included them together, Larry.
Of that first resolution.
That was
Okay. Okay. Third bullet point, approval of RFP for outside study for finance and HR departments. I call upon our HR chair, Jim Campbell.
This item, I think all of you know, is included in our budget. An appropriation is there for up to $75,000 for an RFP for an outside study of the finance and HR departments. You have seen the controller's report where he indicated that he has written, at this point, a preliminary RFP for this purpose. And I might just quote from his report because he detailed a little bit. He's drafted a preliminary RFP for the BET to hire a consultant to conduct a study of the human resources, the retirement administration, and the finance departments to include the following areas of interest: the department organization and structure, staffing levels, opportunities for cross-operational effectiveness, and efficiencies of the respective department operations. The Human Resources Committee looked at this at both our November and December meetings. You have the draft minutes from the HR Committee before you, where you'll see that at the December meeting, we adopted two resolutions. One was to approve that draft RFP, and the second was to appoint a special committee. That special committee would be composed of the controller, the human resources director, and then two of our members, both of us serving on the HR committee, and that's Mr. Simon and myself. And the four of us would be a special committee to work together to finalize that RFP. So those motions were approved at the HR committee by a vote of 4-0, and so I'm asking, I guess I'm moving at this time, that the BET appoint that special committee that I just outlined to adopt a final RFP for this purpose.
It's been moved by Mr. Campbell. Second by Mr. Mason. My understanding, though, also was that the town administrator would also be either used as a resource or part of that discussion up front to make sure that the first selectman's office just has some input into that.
And while we didn't have him as a member of the special committee, and that's not because he couldn't attend our HR committee meeting last week, but we will be working with him also.
Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 11-0-0. Okay. So we come to the last item on our agenda, the approval of the BET meeting minutes for November 15th, 2010.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino.
Second.
Second by Mr. Mason. Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 10-0-1, an abstention. Okay. I wish everybody a very happy New Year. Look forward to working with you towards the presentment of the 11-12 budget, and that should start rolling forward in early January. Maybe not you, Mr. Kelly. All right, we stand adjourned.